皆さん、こんにちは。今日も英語だけ喋っています。でも翻訳ある。Um, Today we will be looking at an information processing apparatus for network meeting, something like a Zoom type of software application. The seminar was drafted in January or February of 2025. I wrote an update in the summer of 2025. That's most of the seminar today. There's one extra slide for the summer 2026 update. Um, this is the serial number of the application. So if you've been following me for a while, in 2024, I introduced this idea of prosecution debt, and it's borrowed from software development where there's a term called technical debt, and it applies to patent prosecution as well. And the basic idea is that when people or businesses have a problem, they don't always choose the most robust solution. They choose an easy or a convenient or a fast solution. We naturally do this. I do it all the time. Everyone does it all the time. But when we do that, um, we're sacrificing the benefit of having this preferred solution. And this basically creates a principal on a loan, right? And this technical debt is the remaining effort that would have been necessary to obtain the good solution, right? That's the principal of our debt. And in the context of patent prosecution, this arises when an applicant sends a case to a convenient US law firm rather than a high quality US law firm, right? It's a different service provider. You should expect different results. This is what they look like. Is this, there's a difference in quality in the service you'll receive. And the significance is that, until this principle is resolved, debts sometimes require an interest payment. Um, in the software context, maybe you have a choice. You can spend, $20,000 to buy a great server, or you can write a little bit of extra code. Maybe the server takes a long time to arrive. And so you say, well, the server's more expensive, the server's going to take a long time, there's going to be a delay. We can move faster, we can move cheaper, we're going to write the code instead. However, it's not as robust a solution. And so sometimes maybe your new code breaks and you have to write, so a fix for it. That's what your interest payments are. In the context of patent prosecution, this will look like additional office actions that are necessary to reach allowance or additional hours worked by Ben Rishi because, you know, um, maybe the US firm needs more instructions. And the way to decrease those interest payments in the principal, or a way, of course, is to improve your own ability by attending seminars like this. Now you are more capable of avoiding those problems. But really, the greatest savings can be achieved with high quality American prosecutors, right? Go for the, um, go for the high quality solution to the problem. And so, today we'll discuss about, how one firm handled this case. We'll discuss about how, what my proposals would have been. Um, but afterwards, I would consider how your U.S. prosecutor would address this case, right? I don't know who that is. I don't know what their strategy would be, but maybe you can guess. Are they likely to repeat some of these issues? So the invention today relates to holding an audio conference over a network. Um, the Translation uses this strange word utterer. Means like speaker, but this is a computer system and there is an audio speaker, like headphones, in the system. And maybe they didn't want to create confusion. They use the word utterer. And we're trying to improve an utterer's voice more appropriately as compared with a case where the quality of the utterer's voice on the listener side is not considered, right? You know, it's one thing if we just try to improve the vocal quality on a speaker side, but when we can take into consideration how it's actually being delivered, we can achieve a better result. And in particular, where the vocal voice quality does not satisfy a condition for a predetermined number of listeners or more, we can control the terminal apparatus used by the utterer. We can say, okay, we're going to change the settings on your side, Mr. Speaker. So this is the flow chart we're going to look at today. We're going to focus on the sound volume adjusting processing in yellow, but we're also going to see some related decisions and actions over on the right side. These red operations are informational. The blue operations are actually like actions that are taken. In this case, it's the filtering. And on this next slide, it's this one is adjusting the microphone. This one is adjusting a speaker. We also have this problem here where there's a mistranslation. So this slide is correct, but when the slide gets translated for America, um, they translate 158 as adjusting the speaker of the utterer, and it should be a listener. And this mistake comes up later. You can see, this is taken right from the specification and says in step 158, the CPU adjusts or reproduce sound volume of the speaker of the terminal apparatus used by the sound volume adjustment target listener. So it wasn't an issue when I drafted the seminar, but it became one later. So this is, there's a lot of different ways to claim this invention. How are we doing it? This is the way, and you can see that we're presenting improvement information in red. That's number one, step 156. Really broad claim. So in November 2024, there's a non-final office action that issues. Claim 1 is rejected as anticipated by Kiter. Kiter shows in figure 8 that a listener, Susan, has downvoted the speaker, the utterer John's audio quality. She says, I can't hear you, thumbs down. And, the idea is that if we get enough votes, we're going to do something about it. What are we going to do in 318? Well, we're going to send a notification to either the rating participant, that's our listener Susan, the rated participant, that's our utterer John, or both. And it can comprise an audio alert indicating an audio issue with suggested actions and prompts for resolving the potential issue. And so here you see exactly, what's claimed in our red portion, right? Sending a notification to the utterer John is a really, I thought this was a solid rejection. Again, partly because the claim is so broad. So you can see again, here's what the applicant does. They've got presenting the improvement information still, and now we're going to adjust the sensitivity of a microphone through the communication unit in response to two things. Having detected that the sensitivity of the microphone is adjustable at 152, and an evaluation result of quality information made by a predetermined number of listeners for an identical utterer being less than a predetermined threshold. So here's our first issue is that this evaluation result is one-sided, right? It says less than a predetermined threshold in the claim. And, I talk a lot about broadest reasonable interpretation, and, I don't know why everyone laughs. Um, because I mean it's really broad at the USPTO. It's unbelievably broad. Here, this condition is always met, right? It's a predetermined threshold. My predetermined threshold is going to be 9 billion people. Um, that's, how many people are on the planet. It's going to be less than that. So this condition is always met. People often ask me, Brian, how do we claim this then? One solution is performing a novel action based on such a result, right? You can say that like, um, you know, maybe you've got some sort of processing that's never performed before, and it doesn't matter that this is claimed broadly, but in our case, this is adjusting the microphone, and that's known. Another solution is clarifying the two-sided result. And in this case, you've got another case that's, more than the predetermined threshold. Um, that's the way we normally do it. Examiners like to see, both sides anyway. Again, there's not a requirement that you use the two-sided result. It's just examiners like it and it's a lot easier. So why not? I mean, unless our applicant doesn't want that, and that's fine, but I think our applicant also doesn't intend to protect the situation of less than 9 billion people, right? There's clearly a scope issue here. Oh, I was wrong. They're this sorry, I misremembered. They have this problem right away. Um, they they misconstrue their own chart, their own figure. So you can see that they have adjusted sensitivity of a microphone at 154 in response to having detected in an evaluation result made by oh, sorry, this is a different issue. Made by a predetermined number of listeners is less than a predetermined threshold. You can see that that's just false, right? The microphone sensitivity is adjusted if it's more than the predetermined number. You can see that in the yellow here and then the yellow yes here. Um, sorry, this isn't. Uh, so this claim language here is not how the system works. Unlike this 158 error, the specification does follow the chart here. And conceptually, this also makes sense that this occurs at more than the threshold, right? Um, this is definitely how it works. So then the question, of course, is, Brian, well, what would you do here? So I would take a step back before I respond here. And this is where I kind of start looking at the other flow chart. The first thing I noticed is that, throughout the system, it's a very maybe it's an overly complicated flow chart. The system isn't so complicated, but the way it's expressed is a little complicated. And the reason I say that is that you can see that consistently the utterer is notified only if a certain number of persons make the same evaluation, right? It occurs in the adjusting processing. It also in at 150, it also occurs here at 120. And we also can see that consistently, if fewer than the certain number of persons make the same evaluation, the problem is only resolved on the listener's end, right? So you can see that here at 124, you can see it in the other flow chart at 158, right? So that we're making the same determinations and we're making similar outcomes based on them. And so then I thought, okay, well, what then is the applicant's inventive concept broadly, right? With all this additional information, I'm realizing that, look, we address the sound on a listener side if the problem is confined to like one listener, and we address the sound on the utterer side if the problem is widespread, right? If multiple people are having it. That's the inventive concept, right? They have more details than that, but there's not like, you know, a decision where we perform an operation if it's less than, and we make a different determination. We perform a different action later if it's more than, right? Like the determinations are the same. When we provide actions is similar. When we provide information, that's similar. Like it's not a more particularly complicated processing here, which is fine, right? That can still seem inventive, but that's also disclosed in Kiter. How did you know that, Brian? Well, I started going through my claims and I looked at claim 17. I didn't look at just at the rejection of claim one. And, I'm assuming that you can pull up a copy of claim seven. This was written back when everybody had access to Patent Center. If you need a copy of this, please just email me and I'll send it to you. Um, but I looked at one of the dependent claims and I saw how it was rejected over this one paragraph, and I'm like, that's it. That's the whole invention right there. In this one paragraph of Kiter. So I can't really go further based on that, right? I'm gonna have to choose something different. And to be honest, Kiter merely describes sending a notification to the listener. Her name is Susan, not an adjusting operation. Okay, so there is a little bit of a difference there, but it's not a patentable distinction. Okay. This is basically automating a manual activity from MPEP 2144.043. You can't do anything with it here. Um, there's no way to move the case forward. So I recommend abandoning. Okay. I can't stress enough to you that this seminar is from February 2024 or March 2024 at the latest is when I started actually, um, delivering this seminar. Brian, how do you know to abandon as of March 2024? Sorry, 2025. You've got one office action, and I'm already telling you to abandon, just save your money. In the US, we generally overcome obviousness rejections by showing an inventive step. Please don't misunderstand this. I don't mean that you need to write it in your remarks. I almost never include those in my remarks. Usually we do that only during an interview, but it's still what we need to show. And I looked through the application again after the first office action and found that there's no claimable subject matter that has an inventive step over Kiter. There's none. Okay. There's a lot of things that look like they could be, and then you start thinking about broadest reasonable interpretation and like different ways to what maybe there's like a different part of the application that refers back. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing you can do. I already know this. And so the question I was asking at that time was, whose job is it to abandon? Right? It's a great question. Does the applicant want the U.S. representative to recommend an option to overcome the office action? Or do you want the U.S. representative to make a portfolio decision? Okay. My option, and people, because I probably would not recommend abandonment here. I probably wouldn't. Okay. Because you are not expecting me to make a portfolio decision. You want an option to overcome the office action. That's what I'm going to give you. Unless there's some sort of opportunity for me to inform you of this, right? How does this applicant's workflow and service fees reflect that choice? If you're just sending me instructions on how to overcome a rejection, I'm not going to write back and ask you to abandon if I can abandon instead. If you're expecting me to propose a response, I'm probably not going to write to you after, especially after the first office action, and say maybe you should abandon, right? You expect options. I'm giving you the best option I can, especially if that's all you're paying for, right? The idea that, some applicants refuse to pay if there's an abandonment. Well, why would I write to you and say, you know what, I've done, it takes a lot longer to recommend an abandonment, especially after the first office action, than it does to write a response. I probably spent 20 hours or something ridiculous looking through this case, trying to figure out if there's anything I could write for this seminar where, I could show you a good solution, a good amendment that would advance prosecution. And I couldn't. And so the idea that I would spend 20 hours for $0 on a real case, as opposed to just, spending whatever, let's call it 8 hours to come up with an amendment that would advance prosecution, like, of course I'm going to do the second one, unless you have some sort of workflow or service fee to encourage me to tell you earlier that you should abandon, right? Why would I do more work for free instead of just, like that's crazy. And I do have applicants that pay me for this type of advice because they realize that they would spend far more in the course of prosecution than to just pay me for all of my time spent and being like, you know what, Brian's going to be right. We're going to abandon. And you'll see that's what happens here. So in February 2025, we get a final office action. The examiner now rejects as obvious over a combination of the previously applied Kiter reference in view of the newly applied Konevsky reference. How does the examiner break it down? He relies on paragraph 48 of Kiter for the predetermined threshold. This isn't, I think this is a fair reading, but this isn't the reading I would give it. He says that if the number of downvotes for a speaker is greater than the number of upvotes, then this indicates the issues are on the utterer side. The predetermined threshold is the number of upvotes being less than the number of downvotes for an utterer. Certainly a reasonable way to interpret the reference or interpret the claim. I wouldn't have done it this way, but I mean, it's fine. Um, and then he adds Konevsky just for this idea of teaching volume sensitivity. All right, Brian. I want to see your proposed response to the final office action, right? It doesn't matter that I think that I would have, abandoned after the first office action, right? Maybe I get instructions to file a particular response, right? Maybe they're the same ones that this law firm received. And so I do it. Maybe they provide these instructions. What am I going to do? This was the end of the seminar originally. If I can't abandon, I must file an RCE to amend the claim to correct the error. Okay. And my suggestion was to claim the noise filter. Okay. I didn't come up with a particular amendment because it honestly doesn't matter. I would like to abandon the case. Um, but that's where the seminar ended. Again, I can't stress this enough. I'm just saying it's the noise filter is the clear feature. I just don't think it will result in an allowance ever. I'm going to have to file this RCE that's going to cost a lot of money. I would have recommended abandonment. Okay, so again, there's probably a time-stamped video private on YouTube, but certainly there are people out there who have, the emailed copy of this seminar. They received this seminar in March 2025. What happens next? The applicant files an RCE to reopen prosecution with an amendment. Okay. Now they're adding you can see that most of this is the same, and they're just adding this extra portion here to generate a control signal to remove noise in the utterer's voice, and so on. I'm not going to read all that. Okay. This portion is the summer 2025 update. So what's the significance, right? What in summer 2025, what am I talking about relative to March? Well, Now we know that this RCE fee and the representative service fee are a waste. Okay. When I gave the seminar originally, there was no response. Maybe they were going to abandon. They didn't. They also filed this IDS on March 27th, 2025. There's a service fee for that, I'm sure. These are all interest payments on the prosecution principal. If you had gone with a better law firm, maybe you can say that like, we would have abandoned, we could have saved all of this money. Save the RCE fee, save this second service fee, the service fee for the Second Amendment, save this service fee for the IDS. But the most important thing, guys and ladies, is that the claim still has the step 150, 152 error in it. Okay. This you do not want this case to grant. And more importantly, that boxes you into an RCE, right? You can't appeal a claim with errors in it. All right. Maybe your examiner won't notice the issue, but I guarantee you that the Patent Trial and Appeal Board will. The applicant can only amend this claim until the errors are resolved or the case is allowed. They cannot appeal. Like you're just going to pour money into this case until this issue goes away. Then another office action issues in April 2025. And now the examiner says it's obvious that claim one is obvious over Kiter and Konevsky from before and this new Chihara reference. It doesn't really matter, but the examiner finds the newly added feature in Kiter and Chihara. Okay, that's what the examiner's relying on them for. Basically, the claim is being rejected on the same grounds. The examiner, as the applicant keeps adding a new feature, the examiner just finds a new reference that teaches that feature. Finally, we start getting a lot of amendments to this claim. Okay. You can see that now we've got this, two adjustings. We've got does not exceed up here. We've got an evaluation result here. Again, I'm not going to do it in detail, but you can see that they are significantly rewriting the claim. They finally remove the error about when the microphone sensitivity is adjusted. Right, you can see that's over here. They're finally getting rid of the step 152 error. Demo. Demo. Now the amendment includes a mistranslation of step 158. Okay. You can see that here on the Japanese slide. This is that error I was telling you about at the beginning. Like now it's showing up in the claim. And the important thing to know too is not just that this is speculative of like, oh, okay, um, maybe I can't appeal this claim, but maybe I can still get a patent issued. You can, but because these features are being added by amendment, the issue has to be resolved during prosecution. Tatoeba, you cannot resolve this issue by reissue. So this issue by reissue. Okay, you can't let the claim issue and then, 2 years later say, oh, that was a mistake. We need to submit a reissue application to correct it. You can't correct this. This has to be resolved during prosecution. Um, so what applicant did, right? I believe this non-inventive step 106 is being added to clarify that the utterer's microphone is adjusted if at least two people complain. Right, that's kind of the context for this portion. But that feature is in Kiter. Okay, like I said, Kiter has everything. And so this response two is an interest payment on the debt principal, right? If you went with a better law firm, you don't have to pay for this response because we would have abandoned. You're also wasting time on the Japan side, right? The Benrishi are charging for every actually this wasn't handled by Ben. Well, I don't know if it was. I don't think it was handled by Benrishi. But certainly there's someone, there is other outside counsel and like or actually I don't even know that. Any I guess in the company at least, in the Kaisha, any time that's being spent on the Japan side is it's a waste. So is waste. So as of last summer, summer 2025, I was speculating that I could be wrong and that a patent will issue. I get things wrong. If you watch my previous seminar in case study number one, I said it was basically unpatentable and they got a patent right away. Um, I get it wrong too sometimes. But the point that I wanted to make was that even if it does issue, there's this written description problem in there. Um, but maybe I'm right. Maybe I was going to be right, and the examiner will reject the claims again. Um, in which case there's going to be a final office action, and then there's going to be more interest payments on the prosecution principal. That, people ask me, like, when we go drinking after, seminars and stuff, people say, Brian, we work so hard. Why? This is why. This is why. This is all interest payments. If you had, me as an attorney and I had reason to tell you to abandon, um, or an opportunity, I would have. So what happens? This is the only new slide here today. This is, written in 2026. In September 2025, the examiner issues a final rejecting claim one over Kiter in view of Koch, Kanefsky, and Chihara. This is again the one new reference. He did not issue a written description rejection. I thought that was interesting. The applicant does not reply, and finally, the application becomes abandoned in April 2026. A full year and probably several $1,000s after I started telling people they should abandon this. Brian, normally when I do this, I would ask for questions. It's a little bit different when I do it online. I've got a question for myself, Brian. We discussed prosecution debt today in the context of an abandonment, right? It's so clear. You said to abandon, everything past that time is a waste of time. It's a waste of money because abandonment concludes a case. Does prosecution debt apply to unabandoned cases as well, right? You know, d is it only particular to abandoned cases, or does it um, can it be in any case? And the answer is that yeah, it does apply to unabandoned cases, but we have to discuss principle in relation to a goal, such as overcoming a particular office action or obtaining an allowance, right? I can't just be like, there's less prosecution debt, if there's not a specific goal in mind. Maybe everyone reaches the same goal. Maybe, there is no goal that can easily, a discrete goal that can be set. And part of the issue in this type of seminar is that an examiner is never going to examine my amendments in a typical case study, right? I don't know if, you know, case study number two, if my examiner is, or what the examiner would think about my amendments. And so the principle can only be estimated if we assume that I can correctly guess that an office action is overcome or if a case is allowed, right? Like I could get it wrong. An examiner, maybe I give you a proposed amendment and somehow magically someone knows the examiner and they ask him for an off the record view. And he says, no, I would not have found that persuasive. I don't know. Like it could happen. Um, in that case, I would definitely be wrong. But otherwise it's just whether I would guess whether it's an office action. And ideally, of course, I'm being very honest. There's other videos where I openly admit that there's like one in particular that's like a semiconductor case. And after I wrote the amendment and I was doing the seminar or drafting up the seminar, I was like, oh, I didn't think about this interpretation. So that one I docked myself an office action. I explained, I'm like, yeah, I would have gotten this one wrong, but I didn't get this one wrong. And unlike case study number one, which resulted in a patent after I said that that claim was unpatentable, this one I was correct. This one should have been abandoned immediately. If you have additional questions, here's how you can reach me. Probably you can see, about the YouTube channel because you're here. Uh, but this is one of several time-stamped evaluations of office actions. There's also this one from Chisai Jitsumo Online, which was relatively current last year. I got this one wrong too, actually. I did not think that the examiner would withdraw the rejection, and they did. It happens. Reasonable people differ. Thank you so much.